I am beside myself excited to be here this morning. I have to tell you, I'm doing my best to keep a lid on it, but I am very excited. It is really a privilege and an honor. This is the second time, actually, I've had the opportunity to stand on this stage. The first time was 25 years ago. It was also the CSC chapel, and I was the CSC chair. And so it's fun to be back. But I have to tell you, the first thought at the front of my mind is 25 years. I should probably have a lot more to show for it, okay? I'm like, wow, what have I been doing with my time? But really, the two best things I can point to that I've done with my time aren't things at all. But they're two beautiful, strong, Holy Spirit-led young women who are on this campus, Alexis, Joy, Michaela Grace. I didn't see you this morning. Where are you? Okay. Your mom and I love you both. We love you each. We are incredibly proud of you. And I'm sure all the rest of your parents love you as well. And so that leaves Big Sam. Big Sam at home. Last man standing Sam. It's you, me, and mom, dude. And the men now outnumber the women. So that's a good deal. We got to use that to our advantage, all right? And of course, I can't proceed without giving honor where honor is due. And I don't know if we have that slide. Do we have that slide to put up on the screen? Yeah, buddy. Okay. During my best years at Wheaton, she was my little honey rock, if you know what I mean. Somebody know what I'm talking about? You don't know what I'm talking about? Nah. She was the queen of my quad. You know what I'm saying? Okay. The only little fish in the Fisher fish bowl for me. Somebody, anybody. Okay, y'all just really into your studies. Okay, that's okay. That's good. That's why your parents sent you here, I think. And before I get started, I'd be remiss if I didn't give a shout out to the 100 volunteers that took Austin High School by storm. Where are you? Let me see you. Woo! I bring you much love and many thanks from our campus. We went back to work on Monday, and the teachers were blown away by what you did in that building in one day. So just know that you are appreciated. It was significant. So to say that I'm overcome by how underqualified I am to stand on this stage and have something to say to you all this morning is not just an exercise in false humility. Oh, make no mistake, from the moment Jared first asked me if I would be willing to speak at a Wheaton chapel, my ego has been in a constant state of inflation. You know, like, it's about time they asked me back to speak, you know? So I will further embarrass myself by confessing that in moments of ego absorption, I have contemplated how my little sharing with you this morning might be the launch pad for my first book, the speaking tour, the engaging one-off dinner conversations with people who line up to meet with me and glean from my wisdom. And then pop, the bubble bursts. And I'm left with the realization of who I really am, and perhaps more painfully of who I'm not. You see, I haven't launched an organization. I haven't designed any sweeping initiatives. I haven't shaped policy at the highest levels. I do not run a company. In fact, there's not a single paid adult who reports to me at work. What I am is a teacher, a math teacher. I teach high school math. It's what I do. To be more specific, I'm a math teacher at Austin College and Career Academy, a small neighborhood school on the west side of Chicago. I've taught there all 24 years of my teaching life, and unless the Lord tells me otherwise, I'll continue to do so for another 10 more. That was the deal. That was the calling to which Trina and I said yes, to be a lifer in the classroom, to remain hands-on and on the front lines. The commitment of longevity has not been an easy one to hold over these years. Turnover and overhaul are the norm in Chicago schools. It is far easier to fire someone than fix a problem. And so my current principal is my 17th in 24 years. 17th in 24 years. I think we're on our 5th name change, and most alarming, I've seen hundreds of teachers cycle in and out of our building in my tenure. I better understand now why God sowed the seeds of a lifetime commitment into my soul at the very beginning. As I prepped for chapel today, I was struck by the realization that my road to teaching in the city was in large part the result of a series of events outside my control. In fact, I'm a CPS teacher simply because I walked out of a CSC chapel a few weeks into my freshman year, and with absolutely no compulsion, no grand purpose, no noble act of the will, stopped at an empty table because I happened to make eye contact with a pretty girl with a clipboard who smiled at me as I passed. Once I stopped, she asked me if I would be interested in joining the West Lawn tutoring ministry. I was not, in fact, interested, but I signed my name anyway, too embarrassed to admit it. I remember leaning over, signing my name and SIPO number on the page and thinking, I gotta make it across the quad and to lunch without making any more eye contact. A few days later, I opened my SIPO to find the invitation to West Lawn tutoring informational meeting. Again, I was not excited about going. God bless you. How could I know then that showing up to that meeting and then boarding the big blue ministry van the week following would be the first step, not only for my life's work, but God's way of preparing Trina and I to work and worship and raise a family on the west side of Chicago? I could not and did not know at the time, but God was at work. And I soon got to know. I got to know Jabari, the first young man I worked with at West Lawn, precocious, smart, and totally uninterested in doing homework. And then, in my sophomore year, I got to know West Lawn Gospel Chapel, making her my home church while at Wheaton, driving into the city each Sunday for the lengthy and vibrant service in the same space where I was tutoring Jabari midweek. And now, later still, in the summer of my junior year, I got to know the west side neighborhood of Lawndale, living and learning on South Avers, while working summer camps at West Lawn Gospel Chapel. Now my eyes were open, and so too was my heart. By the fall of senior year, as I stood on this stage, entreating my classmates to sign up for a CSC ministry, I knew with a fair degree of certainty that God was calling me to a life of serving and learning in a Chicago neighborhood. So now, here we are, another CSC chapel. And I'm being asked to speak to you for a few minutes about service. And we will talk about love. And we will talk about self. But first, we must talk about work. Service is a special kind of work. It is a common work that finds its focus in benefiting someone other than self. In the opening chapters of Nehemiah, we see the litany of peoples who rose up and rebuilt the city. They put their hands to work for a greater good. As it says in Nehemiah 4:6, for the people had a mind to work. I don't think we make enough to do about the everyday kind of work that so often is at the heart of service. The work of the world is common as mud. It's how Marge Piercy sets up her closing stanza of the poem To Be of Use. The work of the world is common as mud, botched. It smears the hands, crumbles to dust. But the thing worth doing well done has a shape that satisfies, clean and evident. Greek amphoras for wine or oil, Hopi vases that held corn are put in museums, but you know they were made to be used. The pitcher cries for water to carry, and a person for work that is real. Brothers and sisters, the work of the world is common as mud. Mud and stone, brick by dusty brick, Nehemiah and the people rebuilt Jerusalem. It was a work that you could literally taste by the end of the day. It was a work you had to wash off your body before you lay down to sleep. But it was a real work, and it anchored the people in something other than themselves. And so, service is a work of the world, common as mud, focused on benefiting the other. And Christian service is a work that is first led by the Lord. It is not just any work, but a work to which we are called, and often a work that requires our sustained resolve to complete. Many times was Nehemiah's resolve to continue work on the city tested. His distractions were many, his naysayers numerous. For me, it was either in my final semester of Wheaton or in my first semester of teaching when on a visit to my grandfather's house, he called me into his study. Opening a deep drawer of the desk, he pulled out a folder containing a single page torn from a yellow legal pad. He invited me over to look. A column of numbers stretched down the page. At the end of this accounting was the bottom line, a running total. It was a big number. My grandfather went on to tell me that this was the cumulative balance of all his donations and charitable givings over the course of his life. It was a big number, several zeros, more than one comma. He then made this point. Those dollars, his many, many donations over the years, had impacted more people by far than all the lives I could hope to impact in a lifetime of teaching. If, practically speaking, I wanted to make a difference, if that was the goal of my life, then I would do better to pursue a more lucrative career, one that would position me to give generously to the needs of others. I will tell you, it gave me pause. But honestly, in the end, it only reinforced my sense of resolve. God had called me to teach. He had a specific work for me to do. And I don't think God was doing it because it was what practically made the most sense. He knew I needed to be a hands-on servant on that front line. Maybe someone else in here knows what I'm talking about this morning. Maybe God is tugging at your heart too. Service is a work in the world common as mud. But when we are called to this work by a holy Father and we surrender to the work, not just as something to do, but as a way in which we live, it is common no more. The Christian service is a sacred work with a rhythm by which a person can keep time. Listen to the repetition from Nehemiah 3. Then Eliashib, the high priest, rose up and built the sheep gate, consecrated it, and set its doors. The sons of Hasaniah built the fish gate, laid its beams, and set its doors, its bolts, and its bars. Joiada repaired the gate of Yeshana, laid its beams, set its doors, its bolts, and its bars. Hanan repaired the valley gate, rebuilt it, set its doors, its bolts, and its bars. And Shalem repaired the fountain gate, rebuilt it, and covered it, and set its doors, its bolts, and its bars. I have grown to appreciate this rhythm in my teaching life, to keep time with my stacks of quizzes to grade, feeling the pen in my hand, jotting scores down the column. I am being faithful in the little things and trusting God will somehow connect these little acts of service into a sacred string of pearls that will bless my students and bring them something good. Service is about work. Service is about work, but it is also, of course, about people, the other and the self. One of the things that I have found in my pursuit of being a better teacher, a better servant, is that sometimes I have to let it be about me first so that I can let it not be about me when the time comes to serve. This is the twofold blessing of service. It is a gift to be given as well as received. Young people, you will need service this year. For some of you, it will be your absorption with self that will need the otherness of service. For others in this student body, your depression and anxiety will need the mindfulness that service requires of you. And for others yet, your illusions of control will need the disarming crisis of service to shove you out of your own strength and into the Lord's. You will need service because you will need the people with whom service will put you in contact. Brothers and sisters, there are people who need you. It is true. There are people all over the suburbs and in the city who need your gifts, your talents, your prayers, your labor, and your love. But I will tell you this, you need those people too. And in my case, I would even say that I needed others more than they needed me. For our first 10 years on Chicago's west side, most of our days were lived out within a few city blocks. We lived in a 2-bedroom apartment on the corner of Pine and Fulton. I worked at Austin High School, which we could see out our third floor living room. And we churched at Rock of Our Salvation, just a few blocks away. There was probably not a single day in those opening 10 years of city living where I did not walk out our front entryway and think about being a white man in a predominantly black neighborhood. Sometimes the awareness would be punctuated by a stranger yelling out, "Go back to Oak Park." And other times we would be stopped and grilled by police, eventually having to produce ID to prove we belonged on the block. But most of the time, my awareness took the form of internal struggles, conflicted interpretations of the looks of people I would pass by on the street or the gaze of those sitting up on their porches watching me pass on by. I was trying to make meaning of my whiteness all the time. And I felt like a child in the middle of a grown folks' conversation. How is it that black folks all around me, and many of them quite younger than I, looked at me like they understood how to make meaning of my whiteness better than I did? I bristled at these thoughts. My whiteness did not define me. And yet, it was a summer evening. We had just finished an evangelism event under the lights of a big tent near church, and I was walking home, fully aware of the fact that I was white. As I came up the final block before reaching our apartment, I noticed a few teenagers on the other side of the street, sitting under the lights on the steps of the high school, talking, laughing. And then I heard one of the young people say, "Hey, watch this." My heart skipped a beat. I braced myself as I walked on. And as I did, the same young man called out to me across the street, "Hey, Bill." I kept walking. "Hey, Jim." I kept walking. "Hey, Steve." Bingo. He had done it. Knowing only the color of my skin, he had guessed my name in 3 tries. Oh, it's funny to me now. You can laugh at that. But I was upset at the time. I remember thinking, I wish my mother had named me Jamal. Brothers and sisters, there are things I needed to learn about myself. My predominantly white, raised in a 2-parent home, Christian self that I did not learn at Wheaton because I could not learn it at Wheaton. It is why service, and in particular service which took me off of Wheaton's campus, was so essential to my spiritual formation over the course of my years here. It has been the people of Chicago. It has been my thousands of students now over the years who have been completing my education into how to be a man and how to be a Christ follower. My students have taught me that being nice and being Christian are not the same thing. It is the people who I came to serve, who have taught me that I, like many other white people in our country, hide behind book answers and man-made rules as a means of propping ourselves up and justifying the social injustices that keep things just the way they are. And that I, like almost all white people, smell like wet dog when it rains. That's right, white people. In case you didn't already know it, when it rains, you smell like a wet dog. I don't know if everybody knows it, but black folks know it. Every time it rains, they know it, shaking their heads, knowing it. Not going to say anything, but knowing it. The giving of Christian service is a two-way process. It is one of the fundamental principles of how God has designed the universe. In giving, we receive. In choosing to serve, we are served. And this actually brings greater honor to those whom we set out to serve. But choosing to serve people, real people, is seldom an easy task. Service, more often than not, is about making a sacrificial choice to love people whom I may find difficult to love at times. Let's go back to Nehemiah one last time, I promise, this morning, and look at his many decisions to love the people throughout the narrative. The opening stanzas begin with Nehemiah's broken heart for a people he did not know. He fasts and he prays, he steps out, risks his life even to persuade the king to commission him to go and serve the people. And he does go and begin the rebuilding work in Jerusalem, but he is also taking care of people. He is protecting the people. He is identifying and cutting off those who do not have the people's best interests at heart. He is making personal sacrifices to ensure the people are not further burdened by his presence among them. And he not only leads the people in rebuilding the city's infrastructure, but he turns his eye on the city's oppressive financial practices, the wealthy exacting interest on the poor, and the subsequent selling of the poor into slavery. And as work on the wall finishes, there are new clean spaces in the city to be filled. And so Nehemiah seeks to fill them with the reading, remembering, and celebrating of the law and all its customs. The people confess their sins. Temple practices are restored. He is serving people. And yet, by the closing chapter of Nehemiah, in spite of all he has done to serve people, Nehemiah returns to Jerusalem to find a mess. And he goes crazy. He goes off. And as a teacher, I get it. I totally get it. Reading through Nehemiah's action statements in the last chapter reminds me of a few things that I have done upon returning to my class after having had a sub, finding that everything came unhinged. I'm not saying I've done all these things, but Nehemiah says, I confronted the nobles. I commanded the doors should be shut. I warned the merchants, I will lay hands on you. I commanded the Levites that they should purify themselves. I confronted the Jews and cursed them and beat some of them and pulled out their hair. I made the Jews take an oath in the name of the Lord. I chased one of the sons of Eliashib. I get it, Nehemiah. I really do. By the time we get to the very last line in the book of Nehemiah, he basically is throwing up his hands. At least remember me, O God, and all I've done for you. Nehemiah, like so many of the other Old Testament prophets and leaders, is fed up with the people. And it's easy to understand why. At least it is for me. When you go to great lengths to set the table for an intellectual feast, a bountiful buffet of knowledge for the students whom you love and live to serve, and then go in the next day to watch your students come in and flip the plates and throw the biscuits and generally make a mess of things, it is hard to continue loving. In the end, it is far easier to rebuild a walled city than it is to rebuild a human heart. I take comfort in Nehemiah's angst, but even greater comfort knowing that God too has had his moments with man. Adam and Eve, kicked out of the garden. And not much long after that, the flood, the ultimate clearing of the room. And yet, when it is done, God promised to never do it again. And he began to make a new way, very slowly and intentionally, a new story. And it is the greatest love story ever told. It is the greatest love story ever lived. And when I choose to enter into the deepest folds of this story, I can be filled to go out and do what even the mighty Nehemiah struggled to do: love knuckle-headed people. You see, people are the problem, but they also happen to be the point. People are the focus of God's redemptive work, and I am telling you, I am warning you, Wheaton, that it is so easy to get out into the world of work and service and lose sight of the people. It's so easy to fall into a mindset of just checking off boxes. Lay the beams, check. Set the doors, check. Bolts and bars, check, check. Early on in teaching, in those first and most frustrating years, the same grandfather who had tried to persuade me a few years before to not go into teaching sat me down and said this: if the student hasn't learned, the teacher hasn't taught. Those words were like a slap across my face. My first reaction was to refute, counterattack this statement of blame. But my grandfather was calm and clarifying in his response. This is not a statement of blame. It is a statement of fact. It is a defining of the terms in the most important of ways. It is the reminder that people are the point. For a teacher, they are always the point. I can stand up at the front of the room and cover all the curriculum I want. But if no one walks away having learned anything new, then I cannot say that I have taught anyone. anything. I may have gone through the motions. I maybe even gave it a solid effort. But there has been no real and lasting change if people have not changed. Wheaton College, if the student hasn't learned, then the teacher hasn't taught. And if hearts have not been changed, then the city has not been rebuilt. Or in more familiar words, if you speak in the tongues of men and of angels, if you understand all mysteries and all knowledge, if you give away all you have, if you deliver up your bodies in sacrifice, but have not love, then you've gained nothing. Love is patient. Love bears all things. Love never ends. So pursue love. As I heard my father say growing up, love is a decision. It is a choice, y'all. Christ, our Savior, certainly had moments of sentimentality where he felt the love for the people. But I guarantee you, the Garden of Gethsemane, that was a choice. A universe-shattering, Hulk-like act of volition, a decision to love. So I leave you, Wheaton College, with this. The work of the world, it's common as mud. And the human heart, the dustiest of clay vessels. So choose to love. And in so doing, be loved. And if you lose your bearings along the way, remember, this is how we know what love is. Jesus Christ laid down his life for us. And we ought to lay down our lives for our brothers and sisters. Choose to serve. Choose to love. Blessings.